Please, they're freezing.
Get inside. Now.
Lost in a Christmas Eve blizzard, the cowboy left her cabin, but his 5-year-old walked back through the Snow-Bitter Creek, Colorado territory, December 24, 1879. The wagon wheel hit ice beneath fresh snow. Silas Mercer felt the lurch before he heard the crack, that terrible sound of wood splitting, of plans, shattering, of everything going wrong at once. The world tilted. Supplies slid. His 3 sons cried out in voices too small for the vastness of the storm. Silas's shoulder slammed frozen ground hard enough to steal his breath, and when he opened his eyes, all he saw was white. White sky, white earth, white death creeping closer with every gust of wind. Before we continue this story, drop a comment with the number 1 if you're watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more Wild West stories like this one. Silas hadn't realized how exhausted he was until warmth began to strip the numbness from his bones. The storm howled around the cabin, slamming against walls that somehow held firm. The boys huddled under quilts, their faces pinking back to life. For the first time since the wagon tipped, the fear in Silas's chest loosened. Ayanna moved with quiet precision, tending the fire, checking the boys' hands for frostbite, ladling hot broth from a kettle that had clearly been simmering long before they arrived. She handed bowls to the children first, then to Silas. The broth was simple root vegetables, herbs he didn't recognize, something like rabbit or grouse. But to Silas, it tasted like forgiveness, like a second chance. "You live alone?" he asked when his voice felt steady enough to trust. Ayanna hesitated only a breath. "Yes." The word hung in the warm cabin air. So simple. But it carried weight Silas could feel, though he didn't understand it yet. She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask again. Micah wrapped burrito tight in his quilt-slurped broth loudly. "This is real good, ma'am." Ayanna's lip twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. "Eat slow. Your stomachs are cold." Eli raised his hand as though he were back in school. "Mom, do you see a lot of people in storms?" "Only the foolish ones," she said. Silas coughed. "That'd be us." Ayanna didn't deny it. The storm worsened as night fell, rattling shutters, drowning the world in white and wind. The glow from the single lantern made the cabin feel like its own universe, warm, golden, alive. A sharp contrast to the endless dark pressing against the windows. Caleb eventually drifted to sleep, sitting up, head dropping to Silas's good shoulder. Micah wasn't far behind. Eli curled on a bearskin by the fire and was out within minutes. Silas watched them a long time. The 3 small faces he had nearly lost. He breathed a shaky breath he hoped Ayanna didn't hear. "You shouldn't have been out there with children," Ayanna said quietly, as though reading his thoughts. "I know. Especially not tonight. This storm kills grown men, let alone boys." He knew she was right. Knew it so deeply he almost couldn't speak. "I didn't want to be home," he admitted, surprising himself. First Christmas without, he stopped. His throat tightened. Ayanna didn't turn away, didn't pity him. Her gaze was level, steady, and somehow gentler than any words he could imagine. "Grief makes people walk into storms," she said simply. Silas nodded. A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed it down. Outside, the wind shrieked like a living thing. Inside, the cabin walls seemed to exhale around them. After a moment, Silas realized Ayana was studying him, not the way settlers sometimes looked at her people, but the way a healer examined a wound, gauging depth before deciding whether it could be repaired. "You are injured more than just the shoulder," she said. Silas frowned. "Ma'am, I'm not you. Carry hurt in your eyes. Heavy hurt." She paused. "That kind does not heal on its own." Silas looked down at his cup, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. When he finally looked up again, she had moved to the window, checking the storm's progress. Snow smothered everything. The world had disappeared behind a curtain of white. "You'll stay until morning," she repeated. "Ma'am, I don't want to trouble. You are already here," she said simply. "And the storm decides, not you." There was no arguing with that. Ayana set out bedrolls for the boys, layering furs and quilts until they looked like small bundled mounds. "I prefer to stay awake." Silas frowned. "What does that mean?" Ayana paused, her sharpening, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that almost made him sit up. "There are spirits in storms," she said. "Old ones. Cold ones. Some call them superstition. Some call them warning. My people know them well." Silas wasn't a superstitious man. But alone, in a warm cabin, in the middle of a white tempest, he felt something move behind her words, something ancient and too large to question. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. Ayana resumed, sharpening her blade. "Fear keeps you alive. But respect keeps you wiser than fear." Silas didn't fully understand, but he felt the truth in her tone. "You said you live alone," he said after a moment. "How long? 2 winters." He nodded slowly. "That's hard living." "It is living," she corrected. Silas didn't press. He meant to speak again, but exhaustion tugged at him, gentle but relentless. Within moments, sleep overtook him. He woke to silence. The storm had stopped. Sunlight, weak winter thin, filtered through frost-coated windows. The cabin felt almost sacred in the morning calm. Ayana was already up, stoking the fire and cooking something that smelled like cornmeal and berries. The boys sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her with fascination. Papa Eli scrambled up and ran to him. "It stopped snowing. Miss Ayana says the storm went away while you were snoring." "I don't snore," Silas muttered. Ayana lifted an eyebrow. "You do." He felt heat rise in his face. "Well, guess being half dead makes a man noisy." "You were not half dead," she said. "Just exhausted." The boys ate eagerly. Silas tried to hide how hungrily he accepted his portion, but Ayana noticed anyway. She noticed everything. When breakfast was done, the boys bundled into their coats and ran outside, shrieking with energy only children possessed. The snow was waist-deep in some places. They flopped into it like happy little animals. Silas watched them through the window, heart caught somewhere between relief and fear of what could have been. Ayana stood beside him, arms crossed. "They are strong," she said. "Clara made them strong." His voice cracked. He hadn't said her name aloud to a stranger since she died. Ayana didn't speak right away. "My husband died in a rock slide," she said softly. 3 winters ago. He was a good man. Quiet. Strong. She exhaled. Grief makes its own home inside you. If you do not open a door for it, it will break the walls. Silas swallowed. How did you move forward? Ayana didn't look at him. I did not. I moved differently. Silas didn't know what that meant, but he felt less alone anyway. When the boys finally stumbled back inside, breathless and soaked with melted snow, Ayana helped peel off their coats and hung them to dry. Silas cleared his throat. We need to make it to town. Supplies are still important. Ayana nodded. I will help you. You've done more than enough, ma'am. I can't ask for. I said I will help. Silas looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't doing this out of obligation, nor out of fear. The light in the window had been a promise, yes, but something else was moving behind her dark eyes. Something he didn't understand yet. Thank you, he said quietly. Ayana studied him with a strange expression. Not soft. Not hard. More like she was seeing a man she hadn't expected to find. Do not thank me yet. She stepped outside, assessing the drifts, the sky, the trees bowed under snow. Silas followed her. The world was dazzling white, silent, clean. The kind of morning that felt like rebirth. Ayana pointed toward the east ridge. There is a trapper's path that runs behind my land. Out of the wind. Safer for children. Silas nodded. We'll take it. Ayana hesitated. I will walk with you until the ridge. After that, the land opens. You will find the settlement easily. Mom, that's a long walk. It is not the first long walk I have made. Silas felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Respect. Gratitude. And something else he wasn't ready to name. The boys filed out behind them, bundled and bright-eyed. Caleb slipped his small hand into Silas's. Eli slipped his into Ayana's without asking. She froze for a moment, then gently closed her fingers around his mitten. Silas saw it all, and something shifted in him. Not healed, not fixed, but beginning. Silas had seen many things since coming west, men broken by land, by alcohol, by loneliness. He had seen winter bury entire hopes beneath its white and wordless weight. But he had never seen a woman cry like that. Not openly. Not freely. Not like someone who had held herself together for so long that the smallest kindness finally broke the dam. The boys didn't pull back. They didn't stiffen or shy away the way children sometimes did in the presence of adult grief. They simply leaned in, surrounding her with small arms, small bodies, small hearts. There was something sacred in the sight. 3 boys giving back to the world a little of what they'd lost. Ayana finally drew a shuddering breath and wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand. Enough of that, she murmured, though her voice was rough. It is Christmas. You should smile today. We can smile, Micah said. It's easy here. That sentence settled into Silas like a weight he didn't have the strength to lift. Easy here. When was the last time anything had been easy for them? Ayana touched each boy's cheek gently before stepping back. She folded the river stone into a small deerskin pouch and tied it to a cord around her neck. For a moment, her fingers lingered there, as though afraid it might vanish if she didn't anchor it. "Thank you," she said quietly, not to Eli alone, but to all three. Silas cleared his throat, trying to steady something shaking inside him. "We're in your debt, ma'am." "More than I can say." Ayanna shook her head. "You came to the door." The storm commanded. I obeyed. He knew she didn't mean it humbly. She meant it truthfully. Out here, storms were law, and the living survived by listening. The boys spent another hour playing in the thinning drifts outside the cabin. Their laughter carried through the open door as Silas helped Ayanna tie down supplies, check her small shed for damage, and shovel a narrow path to the woodshed. His shoulder ached, but it was a familiar kind of pain, now less the sharp warning of injury and more the nagging reminder that work still needed doing. Snow glittered like shards of glass across the yard. The boys came running back in cheeks, red hands, cold voices tripping over each other with stories birds in the trees' rabbit tracks, the thrill of snow deep enough to swallow them whole. Ayanna listened to each of them with patience, with interest, with what could almost be called affection, though she did not reach for the word. Silas watched from near the hearth, aching with a strange mixture of gratitude and something dangerously close to longing. When the meal at midday was done, corn cakes, more broth, dried fruit, she'd saved the boys, began gathering their small things. The carved bird, the candy jar, the stone now around Ayanna's neck. Things that meant more than gifts usually did. Ayanna tied cloaks around the boys' shoulders, one by one, checking buttons, scarves, mittens. Clara used to do that. Silas swallowed hard against the sting in his chest. "You will follow the trapper's path," she told them. "I will walk ahead. Stay close." "We will," Caleb promised with more solemnity than a boy of 10 usually had. Outside, the world was blinding. Snow as far as they could see. But the storm had left behind a strange beauty trees, glazed in glass mountains, rimmed with ice sunlight, catching on frozen branches like 1,000 tiny fires. They began walking. Ayanna moved smoothly, quietly, her feet leaving almost no imprint in the drifts. The boys trudged behind her, slipping occasionally but never complaining. Silas limped in the rear shoulder, throbbing breath fogging in the air. They walked for nearly an hour before they reached the ridge. From that point, the land sloped downward, revealing the distant hint of settlement, thin smoke rising from chimneys, a few rooftops breaking the monotony of white. Ayanna stopped. "This is as far as I go." Eli's small hand tightened around hers. Silas saw the boy's eyes go glassy, saw the protest forming on his lips. But Ayanna knelt, bringing herself level with him. "Your home is that way," she said softly. "And you must go home." "Will we see you again?" Eli asked. The question landed in the snow between them, fragile and heavy all at once. Ayanna hesitated. Silas saw that hesitation, felt something loosen in his chest and something else tighten. "You may," she said at last, "if the land allows." It was not a promise, but it was not a refusal either. Caleb stepped forward, then pulling something from his coat pocket. A wooden button carved by Silas years ago, worn from rubbing fingers. Clara had sewn it onto Caleb's first winter coat. When that coat was outgrown, The boy had saved the button, keeping it as a charm. He held it out to Ayanna. "For when you think of us," he said simply. Ayanna looked at the button as though it were gold leaf, not pine wood. She took it with the same slow reverence she'd given Eli's stone. "You honor me," she whispered. Micah, who had been quiet the entire walk, stepped forward next. He wrapped his arms around Ayanna's waist. She seemed startled, then slowly folded her arms around him too. When the boys finally stepped back, Ayanna rose to her full height. The wind caught her hair, lifting a few strands loose from their tie. She looked like something carved into the landscape, something that had always been there waiting. Silas approached her last. He didn't know what to say. Words felt flimsy, weak, insufficient. "Thank you," he managed, "for everything." Ayanna held his gaze. He felt the weight of it, felt seen in a way he hadn't since Clara. "Take care of your sons," she said. "I will." "And take care of yourself." Silas exhaled shakily. "I'm trying." Ayanna nodded. "Good." Something passed between them then. Not a promise. Not a confession. Something quieter. More dangerous. The recognition of two people who had known loss, had lived with it, had carried it alone for too long. Ayanna stepped back. The boys turned toward the settlement. Silas looked over his shoulder once, just once. Ayanna stood exactly where they'd left her, the stone at her neck, the button in her hand, snow swirling around her like a veil. Then she lifted one hand in farewell. Silas lifted his in return. They walked. The settlement came into full view. People moved between buildings, unaware of how close 4 lives had come to being lost. Silas tightened his grip on Eli's hand. The boys trudged forward, step by step, carrying their gifts and something more quiet hope. When they reached the outskirts, Caleb tugged Silas's coat. "Papa, yes, son. Do you think she'll be okay out there alone?" Silas looked back toward the ridge, though the cabin was far beyond sight now. He saw only snow and sky and the shadow of mountains. "She's weathered more storms than we can imagine," he said softly. "She'll be okay." Eli looked up at him. "Will we see her again?" Silas didn't answer right away. The wind shifted cold and sharp, but not unfriendly. A reminder. A nudge. "I hope so," he said. And for the first time in 18 months, hope didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breath. It felt like life returning. It felt like the first quiet step toward a future he hadn't believed possible. Silas didn't answer Ezra. Couldn't. The words lodged in his throat like stones. He sat there on the Coleman's floor, holding Eli against his chest, feeling the boy's heartbeat fluttery weak, but steadying beneath layers of blankets. Every few breaths, Eli shivered violently. Martha said it was good. Said it meant his body was fighting its way back. But Silas felt each tremor like a blow to his own ribs. Ezra crouched beside him. The older man's face was lined with wind and years and everything Montana could throw at a person, but his eyes were gentle. "You know what that boy was walking toward," Ezra said quietly. "Not foolishness. Not adventure. He was walking toward a home he thought he found." Silas bowed his head. His breath shook. "I didn't mean to hurt her. Or them. I didn't know what was right." Ezra snorted softly. "Sometimes Ride ain't clean. Sometimes it's muddy and cold and looks a whole lot like the wrong thing. But a man's heart knows. Yours does. You're just too scared to listen. Martha brought another warm cloth, checking Eli's pulse, touching his cheek with the tenderness only a woman who'd tended dozens of broken bodies could manage. "He'll live," she murmured, "but he'll be weak for days. You should stay here tonight." Silas nodded numbly. When the Colemans finally stepped out of the room, leaving him alone with his son, Silas, let the truth crash into him like the storm that had nearly killed them. Eli had walked into the dark for a woman he'd known one day, because he'd felt something Silas was too broken to allow himself to feel. Family, connection, warmth, a future. Silas stroked Eli's damp hair. "Son," he whispered, voice raw, "I'm so sorry you thought you had to go alone." Eli stirred eyelids fluttering. "You said Mama wrote a letter," the boy murmured, about not staying sad forever. Silas closed his eyes. "She did." "Then why aren't you listening?" The question was soft, but it cleaved Silas in two. He didn't sleep that night, nor the next morning. He sat by Eli's side as the boy drifted in and out, mumbling Ayanna's name once or twice, reaching out as if expecting her hand. Each time, Silas gently folded the small fingers back into the blanket. Something inside him twisted tighter. By midday, Eli could sit up with help. He drank weak broth from Martha's spoon. He even managed a tiny smile when Micah and Caleb arrived breathless and worried, having ridden over with Ezra after finishing chores. Caleb knelt by his little brother. "Don't ever scare us like that again," he said, voice trembling harder than he wanted it to. Micah took Eli's hand, gripping it fiercely. "We thought you were gone." Eli looked at them with bleary seriousness. "I wasn't gone. I was walking." Martha wiped her eyes and pretended she'd gotten soot in them. Ezra put a hand on Silas's shoulder. "You taking him home today?" Silas looked down at his son. At the blankets. At the tiny, stubborn spark of determination that hadn't dimmed even in near death. "No," Silas heard himself say. "I'm taking him where he was trying to go." Micah's head shot up. Caleb's breath caught. Ezra's eyes softened. "Good," he murmured. "About time." They set out as soon as Eli could stand with Silas holding him. Silas wrapped the boy in furs, then inside his own coat, then tied another blanket around both of them for good measure. Eli nestled against him, heavy with exhaustion, but awake enough to guide them. "Papa," he whispered, "we have to go before she thinks we don't care." Those words carried Silas through the cold, through the miles, through the guilt. He had no business showing up at Ayanna's door after the way he'd left, after the way he'd pulled the boys away like she was danger instead of the safest place they'd known since Clara died. But if a 5-year-old could walk through a Montana winter believing in something better, then Silas could ride. The trail was familiar now. Snow still deep, but the sky clear. The mountains wearing their winter crowns. Air sharp enough to bite. Caleb and Micah rode close behind, unusually quiet. As if they knew this wasn't a trip for chatter. As if the land itself demanded reverence. Halfway there, Eli stirred and pointed. "Papa." The light. Silas looked up. There it was. The candle in Ayana's window, still burning, still waiting. His heartbeat stumbled. Not everyone lit their lamp after the storm passed. Most didn't waste wick and oil. But Ayana had left hers glowing long into daylight, and Silas felt the truth of it hit him squarely. She was hoping. Or hurting. Or both. And he had done that. The guilt nearly made him stop breathing. They reached the small clearing before the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. The door was shut tight against the cold. Silas stopped the horse, lifted Eli into his arms, and walked the last 30 feet on trembling legs. He raised his hand, paused. He suddenly felt like a boy again, standing on someone else's porch, unsure if knocking was bravery or foolishness. But Eli lifted his mittened hand and knocked for him. 3 small raps, the kind that said, "I came back." Footsteps sounded inside. The door opened. Ayana stood framed in warm firelight, just as she had the night she saved them. But this time, her eyes widened, not with caution, not with assessment, but with shock that cracked straight through to something deeper. Her gaze dropped to Eli. She inhaled sharply. Her hand flew to the riverstone at her neck. "Eli," she breathed, voice breaking. Silas felt Eli tense in his arms. Then the boy whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't make it all the way." Ayana reached for him, hands trembling her composure, shattering like thin winter ice. "Come inside," she said, voice rough. "Please, bring him inside." Silas stepped through the doorway. Warmth wrapped around them. The boys followed, closing the cold out behind them. Ayana touched Eli's face with the gentlest fingers Silas had ever seen. "You scared me," she whispered. Eli blinked up at her. "You were alone on Christmas." Ayana's breath hitched. A sound between a sob and a gasp. Silas couldn't bear it. "Ayana," he said softly. "He shouldn't have walked alone. That was my fault. All of it. I'm ashamed." She looked up at him. Really looked. Her eyes sharp and soft all at once. "You left because you believed it was right," she said. "Now you are here because you learned it was wrong." Silas swallowed hard. "I don't know what this is. Or what it could be. I only know that leaving felt like tearing something alive out of me." Ayana's gaze flicked to the fire. "You have your own home," she murmured. "And it hasn't felt like one in 18 months. Silas stepped closer. "Not touching. Not assuming. Just close enough for truth." "I thought loving again would betray Clara," he said. "But leaving someone to loneliness, someone who gave my sons a night of peace they haven't had since she died, that was the real betrayal." Ayana pressed a hand to her heart as if steadying something. "You do not owe me anything," she whispered. "No," Silas agreed. "But I owe my sons a life that isn't made of ghosts. And I owe myself a chance to feel anything again." A long silence stretched between them. Winter sunlight glowed through the frosted window. Snow glittered outside. Inside, the fire cracked softly. Ayana looked at the boys' 3 faces, watching her with hope too fragile to withstand more breaking. Then she looked at Silas. Slowly she nodded. "Stay," she said, "for tonight." Eli smiled, exhausted but radiant. Micah exhaled like he'd been holding breath for days. Caleb brushed a tear away before anyone could see. Silas felt something open inside him, something he hadn't dared let himself touch in, so long he barely recognized it. Not certainty, not promise, but beginning. He stepped fully into the cabin, shutting the door behind them all. Outside, winter pressed against the walls. Inside, warmth waited. And Silas realized for the first time since Clara's death that he wasn't stepping out of grief. He was stepping towards something new, something alive, something that felt terrifyingly and beautifully like hope. Winter loosened its hold slowly that year. Even after the wetting snow still clung to the shadows of the pines, and the wind still carried a bite that crept into clothes and bone. But something warmer lived inside the Mercer Ranch, now something that shifted the balance even on the coldest mornings. It began with simple things. Ayanna humming while she cooked soft melodies that drifted like smoke through the rooms. Micah sitting beside her at the table, carving his own little bird while she guided his hands. Caleb learning her way of tracking animals, returning home breathless with pride because she'd called him sharp-eyed. And Eli, always Eli, following her, like her shadow, small hand, always ready to slip into hers as if he'd been doing it his whole life. Silas watched it all from the doorway, most mornings coffee warming his hands, and felt something inside him ease into place. Like a bone that had been out of joint for too long, finally settling back where it belonged. The first trouble came 2 weeks after the wedding. Nothing loud. Nothing dramatic. Just a visitor. Reverend Alden from the settlement rode up one afternoon, Bible tucked under his arm, expression tight enough to crack. He dismounted stiffly, eyeing the cabin, the yard, the boys chopping wood under Ayanna's instruction. He nodded at Silas. "Heard you remarried." Silas stepped onto the porch, shoulders squared. "I did." The Reverend cleared his throat. "A native woman." Silas didn't blink. "Yes." Well, Reverend Alden shifted uneasily. "Some folks are talking is all." Ayanna stepped out onto the porch, then setting down a basket of kindling. She greeted the Reverend with a polite nod posture, calm and composed. Reverend Alden froze. Not hostile, just startled by her grace, her steady gaze, the way she carried herself like someone who bowed to no one but the land and whatever spirits guarded it. "I wish you both well," he said, awkwardly touching his hat before retreating to his horse. Truly. He left more quickly than he'd arrived. Silas let out a slow exhale. Ayanna watched the Reverend disappear down the trail. "People will talk," she murmured. Some kindly, some not. She glanced at the boys. "They will hear it first." "I'll handle it," Silas said, jaw tight. Ayanna shook her head gently. "No, we will handle it." He felt something warm settle deep inside him at the word "we." When the boys came over, she knelt to their height, touched each head softly. "You do not hide," she said. "You do not fear. You look them in the eyes, and you show them who your family is." Caleb nodded firmly. Micah swallowed hard, but stood straighter. Eli wrapped both arms around her waist, which seemed answer enough. From that day on, Silas noticed something change in town. Side glances became warmer. Comments turned softer. Some women brought baskets of food to welcome the new missus. Others offered cloth scraps for her quilting tools.